Hey Joe fans, Joe Fan 82 here. Today I am with Mr. Joe Slepski, the host, founder, and star of the Joe on Joe podcast. Hey Joe.
Hey Joe Fan 82, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining me. First question I have for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from?
Sure,
what
man.
You do?
Yeah, well, my name is Joe Slepski of the titular Joe on Joe podcast. I'm originally from Chicago, which you can probably hear in my sausage-laden voice. Mm-hmm. My wife is always on me about that. And been living out in Los Angeles for about 6 years now. And what do? I do Gamefly. I work for Gamefly. I do email marketing for Gamefly, which is the video game rental service. If you're listening, subscribe. We're amazing. Keep me employed. And I also work at Golden Apple Comics out here in lovely Los Angeles at Melrose and La Brea. If you're out here, or if you're online, we have a really robust online store. Go online, buy something from us, and stop by the store and say hi. I'm there every Saturday. And I'm a writer and a podcaster. And then I have a couple hours of sleep.
And you have a podcast called Joe on Joe. Can you tell us more about what that is?
Sure. Well, Joe on Joe is, I like to bill it as the greatest G.I. Joe podcast that you will listen to during the half hour that you're listening to it.
Right.
So it may not be the best you've ever heard, but during that half hour you're listening to it, you're going to be like, this is the best Joe podcast I'm listening to right now, in this moment. We watch every episode of the G.I. Joe Real American Hero show in order, and we do like Mystery Science Theater style it. You know, you and I did a episode together. I've gotten friends from all over the country, and we watch the show together and comment on it and talk about G.I. Joe. And most of my guests never even saw an episode of G.I. Joe before.
Yeah, I've noticed that you've gotten a lot of people that this is their first introduction to the animated series.
Yeah, it's fun. It's like it's introducing something that I love, that's always kind of been a part of me, but I've never really, like, it's not like an outward. I don't walk around and have Joe tattoos, or and I'm not a huge Joe memorabilia collector. I have extensive comic collection of it, but it's not something that I really advertise, but it's always meant a lot to me. And so I'm able to share that with a lot of people in my life and just get their reactions to it. And to a person, I almost said to a man, but we've got a lot of women on the show too. They come away smiling. They've always enjoyed it. Even my wife, who really, really has no desire to watch G.I. Joe, she enjoys being on the show.
I have to say, one of my favorite episodes was one of your early ones where you were a synthoid during the entire episode. And I didn't realize it, and so I listened to the whole thing. And as I'm listening to it, I'm wondering, like, wow. Can you go ahead and just describe what that was for people?
I'll tell you what that was. I needed to record an episode. And the episodes were going to be the Synthoid Conspiracy, and that's a 2-parter. And I didn't plan enough. So if you listen to my, we're on like episode 81 or 82 by now. So I've got a lot in the can, but like the first miniseries I just did with just me and a microphone, because I wanted to kind of figure out what I was doing and kind of, figure out the show. And then I brought some guests in. And when we got to the Synthoid Conspiracy, it was a 2-parter, and I didn't necessarily want to have someone do both parts because I wasn't sure if that would work. And then I just ended up not scheduling anything. So I came home from work one day, and this is exactly how it happened. And I was really bummed out because I didn't have anything good. Like it was going to be me again. And I didn't want to just go back to me doing a solo show. And it was in the middle of the hotly contested election last year. And it was a show about duplicates. And so I got that idea of, like, you know what? Let's do it straight, do it as Synthoid, and then the second part we'll do it. And then I was able to bring my wife in at the end, which I thought was a kicker.
Yeah, I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, wow, this does not sound like the Joe that I have come to know on the show. And so it ends, and your wife comes in, and it didn't hit me until like a few minutes after I finished listening to it.
Yeah.
Then I went, oh, crap, he was a Synthoid the whole time. That was brilliant.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of fun doing that. I like how I think I let the audio, if I remember correctly, I let the audio play out for a few minutes afterwards. Like the mic just went dead and sat there.
So how did you get into podcasting, and what made you want to start the podcast about G.I. Joe?
Sure. So I was a big podcast listener when it kind of started, like going back, 10 years now, at least 10 years. And it started a couple years before that, I think. But like when it was really starting to pick up steam with Adam Carolla making a podcast and Kevin Smith's early Smodcast, like I've listened to every episode of Smodcast from Kevin. And I love the medium because I grew up with AM radio in a big way. Like I loved AM talk radio in Chicago. There were some really major shows in my teen years. So I just love the format. I love hearing people talk. Sports talk radio took over for a little bit, but a lot of times sports talk can get a little dopey. So when podcasts came along, I just fell in love with it. So when we moved out to California, one of the things that we were looking for things to do out here, and my wife found a Craigslist ad, I think, looking for interns for a podcast, and I answered the call and ended up being a show called Storyworthy. So if your listeners are out there, go to find Storyworthy podcast. It's hosted by Christine Blackburn, and at the time, Hannes Finney as well. They're both tremendous friends of mine. They are tremendous people. Christine's been a guest on the show, and Joe. I want to get Hannes on there too. And they run a wonderful storytelling podcast. They get all kinds of celebrities and local LA people. And I interned with her, and she taught me everything I knew about it. From there, I started helping produce another show called Don't Tell My Mother, which is also a fantastic show. My wife did one for a little while, and then I took a break from doing it just because schedules changed and I couldn't assist and couldn't produce, whatever. So I went about 8 months or so without doing any podcasting, and I was really missing it. And I decided I wanted to do something with me on mic because I had never been on mic before. So I just started thinking about ideas, and I love the idea of watch-along shows. So I was thinking about all the various cartoons and stuff that I was into, and I realized that for me, there wasn't a Joe podcast that I was really into. And I know there are some great podcasts out there, so I don't mean that as a slam at all. It's just it was an opening because I love Batman. There was a lot of Batman podcasts, Simpsons. There's a lot of Simpsons podcasts. There's a lot of Star Wars, all that stuff. So I was looking for a niche, and then the name Joe and Joe jumped in my head, and I'm like, well, I have to do it now because I love that name. So
yeah. Well, yeah, you had to do it once you got the name.
Yeah, right.
So what is your history with G.I. Joe? What toys did you have? Did you watch the cartoon, read the comics?
So I had never heard of G.I. Joe until I was about, it was actually right. I say never heard as if it was around for 30 years, but I wasn't familiar with the 12-inch show at all when I was coming up till I was about 8 years old. And I think it was about my 8th birthday that I got a Snake Eyes. We were at a Showbiz Pizza, and with the rocket fire explosion behind you. I don't know if that means anything. I think the rocket fire explosion are not very far from you in Florida, by the way. If you're familiar, look it up. They're amazing. It's a bunch of animatronic animals that sing songs.
Well, we had something called Circus Pizza.
Oh, okay.
And it was animals like a lion and an elephant.
Yeah.
And singing. Sounds pretty much like the same thing.
Same concept. They did a documentary about rocket fire explosion. It was on Netflix a few years back. It's fantastic. And there's a guy who took the animatronics from a few of them, and I'm almost positive he lives in Florida. He has it set up completely like in his garage, so it's completely playable. Oh, it's so weird. It's so great. Anyway, it's a weird Showbiz Pizza party, and one of my buddies, I don't remember who, but he gave me, and I opened it up, and it was a Snake Eyes, and I was like, I don't know who this is. I'd never heard of J. Joe. What is this? And he was like,
Version 1 Snake Eyes.
Version 1, yeah. He was like, it's Snake Eyes. I was like, who's Snake Eyes? He's awesome. Like this dude all in black. And they're like, it's the coolest thing. You got to check it out. And I'm pretty sure right after that party, which it was next door to like a Venture's Air, which is like basically a Target back in the day. I made my mom go over there. When you have a little birthday money, right? So we went over there, and there was this end cap. I distinctly remember the end cap of G.I. Joe stuff. And I was like, there's all these dudes, and they all match this guy. Like, that's amazing. So it went from there. Got some of the toys. Within probably about 3 years later, Well, no, because I got issue 1 of the G.I. Joe comic book when it first came out. I got it for a trip that we took, and I read it cover to cover and cover to cover to cover. But I wasn't reading comics at the time. But I read this one, and years later for Easter, when I was probably 10 years old, I think. My mom gave me see how I could go on for hours about this. This stuff sears into my brain, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Are you that way?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it just sears these moments, and I don't know if it sounds superficial. I don't care, because it's like that's the stuff that shaped me, you know. So for Easter, I got some of the mini digest comics where they were doing Marvel did the reprints, you know, and they were in my Easter basket, you know, quote from the Easter Bunny. And I was like, these are awesome, Mom. Where'd you get these? Where'd these come from? Well, they were at the store, and you know, she found them at like 7-Eleven or something. So we went there. We grabbed every other one that we could find, and then it was on. And then it was she like started looking up. Well, there's a comic book store that sells comics here, and so we started going there. And then and then so I did G.I. Joe exclusively for a couple of years. Spent all my paper route money to buy G.I. Joe comics, and of course I was watching the cartoon too, of course.
I didn't know that comics existed, let alone G.I. Joe, until much later.
Do you have any of the original comics collection right currently?
That I had when I was a kid?
Or like, have you ever gotten into the comics part of it?
Oh, yeah. I have the issues that I had when I was a kid, and I have one short box. I'm a big comics guy, like you.
Nice.
I probably had a dozen short boxes full of comics, and I got married. I had to purge stuff. I'm down to one short box. It's mostly G.I. Joe.
Awesome.
Yeah, I got the later, but so entering the comics later, I had no idea what happened. It was like in the hundreds, I think, when I started.
Okay, yeah.
So there was 10 years of story that I had no idea, but my grandmother got me the Foot Locker with all the trading cards in it. You know, the ones that
Yep. Yeah, Instagram out, yeah.
And those had cards for all of the characters. So
and the comic books, they have the comic book covers in there too. The Impel set.
And those cards filled in a lot of the gaps of who people were and what happened before. So
that's great. Yeah. I think when I started collecting, like digging in, it was right around in the 40s, like issue numbers. It was right around the 40s. That's when after I'd got those reprints and started buying them like off the rack, because it was right around that Invasion of Springfield with Flint on the cover and the Mauler. And it's just every dime every penny I spent was to get G.I. Joe comics and get them all. And it's funny.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say I had bought when I was a kid. I quote finished my collection. But I had bought a bunch of second prints and never knew it until I was like in my late 20s. And I mean, at that point, I'm a very experienced comic collector. But I hadn't gone through my Joe collection in a while. And I looked a little closer and I'm like, these are all reprints. So that's why I ended up having to go back and get first prints for everything.
Yeah. So when did you get out of G.I. Joe? What was the last year that you were into it?
So collecting the toy wise, so I watched the show. I always watched the show until it stopped airing. I didn't watch the DIC stuff when it aired. So I must have just watched it when it was the good stuff. When the DIC stuff came on, I know I stopped watching it because I've since seen them all, and I know I didn't watch those a lot. I think I'd seen like Operation Dragonfire a little bit, and maybe that turned me off, so I stopped watching it. But I collected the toys all the way through 87, where Snake Eyes version 3 was my last figure that I bought, and I specifically bought him. And again, I know exactly what store I bought him at. I know when, I know the moment I bought him off a shelf. I 100% remember buying it, picking it up, holding it in my hand, saying, "This will be the last G.I. Joe figure that I buy because I'm going into junior high and trying to talk to girls." So
was there a single tear?
Oh my!
Coming down your eye?
Totally, dude. Well, I think I still played with them for a little bit, but I stopped buying them. I had a big blowout battle that lasted all weekend long before I put him away. Like, it was an epic 2-day event where all my bases were set up all over my bedroom. People died. There was murder. There was, like, it was full on carnage. Ends up being giant ninja. Like, there were multiple ninja battles. There was subterfuge. People dressed as other people sneaking into the pit, planting bombs. Like, it was
the last one. You can't hold back.
It was epic. It culminated on the Terrordrome. The air sea platform got sunk, and people, like, some of the people died on that. The pit got invaded by Storm Shadow, and he planted a bomb that weakened their defenses. And it took one of the walls out, so then they stormed that. And then eventually the Joe team got it together, and they ended up invading Cobra Island and hitting the Terrordrome. And, like, Destro, like, took a sword to the chest. Like, everybody died.
Geez.
It was epic. It was. I really did a final battle for my Joes.
I think mine was just a fizzle out. It wasn't anything like because my brother is 2.5 years younger than me,
yeah.
And he was still playing with them. And I just stopped. He still went ahead with it, and that was right around when Star Brigade came out.
Yeah.
And that was so when you finished. That's pretty much when I started.
Right. Yeah. Pass the torch to you. I like that. Karmically pass the torch.
I didn't see the Sunbow series when it was on, but I did see the movie.
Yes.
The movie came out in '87,
mm-hmm.
and I got it. We rented it from a mom and pop VHS rental store called M&M Video, and they always had M&Ms in a little vending machine. And I saw that, cover on the rack there. Like, we're getting that.
Totally. Yeah, well,
so
it was direct to tape. Like, they didn't ever release in the theaters. Yeah.
And so I loved that movie. Had no access to any of the figures associated with it, because by the time it was like 88 or 89. By the time I saw it,
mm-hmm.
those figures weren't on the shelves anymore.
Nope.
And then I picked up I did watch the Deke series.
Ooh, sorry.
when I was a kid, it was fine because we didn't have any.
Yeah, I mean, it is fine. It is fine for kids, but it started that trend. I had Bill Reitner on the show a little bit ago, and he said that one of the things that they absolutely said, they told him from the start that the writers were doing, this is for the Sunbow stuff, they were writing it as real people. And I think that comes through so much on almost even the crazier Sunbow episodes, where crazy stuff happens. They're all very real people. When it went to DIC, they're not real people, they're cartoon characters.
It seemed like it was I don't know if dumbed down is the
totally
right
dumbed
term.
down. Totally dumbed down is the right term, yeah. And that was the start of a time. I think cartoons have always dumbed down a little bit, but you really had a lot of mainstream dumbing down of cartoons then in the 90s,
I've got a 5-year-old son, and I've tried introducing him to the Sunbow series, and so far it seems like he's not it's still like maybe just a little bit over his head a little bit.
I think the wheelhouse is 8 to 10 years old.
Yeah,
I think 5. Yeah, right. I think 5. And I don't mean this. I'm not questioning your parenting skills, but I think at 5, I don't think there's enough of like this is. I don't think there's enough here to appeal to most kids at 5. But you get to like that 7 to 10-year-old range, I feel like that's the right spot for G.I. Joe, because then the army stuff kind of settles in for boys. It's a little a little more interested in maybe some of the military. And I'm not an army fanatic or anything by any stretch, but like the gender roles, I think, is what I'm saying. Start getting a little more defined.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about the comics, I know you've had Aubrey Sitterson on your show before. Are you currently reading his run on G.I. Joe at IDW? Yes. And okay, you are. So what do you think of the series so far?
I think it's great. I think Aubrey's doing a wonderful job on it. It was my pleasure to have him on. We did a 2-parter back in December, and I think I love it. I love I love what they're doing with the comic. I love the crossover stuff. The schedule has been a little rough. I think that I think they had some delays in production for whatever reason. So I feel like it hasn't come out as frequently as I think I was expecting it, but it's solid. He's bringing in a lot of cool cartoon concepts with tying it in with that IDW reality, which is a little more grounded in reality. The IDW Joe books were a little more real world, but he brings in stuff like the Fatal Fluffies.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. But without calling them that, they're just these demons from this hellscape. And his introduction, I think it's Thundercracker, the Transformer, that's on the Joe team.
Skywarp.
It's Skywarp. Yeah, Skywarp. Having Skywarp and Rock and Roll, their relationship is fantastic. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think though that they're, and I'm not sure when everything's airing and stuff, but I had heard that they're rebooting it. Again, part of the big Hasbro universe tie-ins for the comics. I think that run is going to stop. Audrey hopefully stays on the book, but they're kind of going to do another soft reboot in the fall of 2017.
Yeah, I just heard that. I don't know if he's staying on the book or not. And I think they're combining the G.I. Joe book, with the Mask.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And it's a different artist than the current.
Yeah, I hope Aubrey stays on. He's a super nice dude, and his G.I. Joe X Street Fighter miniseries was fantastic. Just fantastic. So he really has a great handle on these characters. So I think it'll be great.
All right, Joe, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where we can find you on the podcast and social media?
Yeah, well, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find Joe on Joe. If you're on iTunes, just do a search for Joe and Joe. I have a website, joeandjoe.com. It's not a great website, but that's all right. You find me on Facebook at Joe on Joe Pod, Twitter and Instagram at Joe on Joe Pod as well. And you can send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com. And that's what Ben did, and that's how we connected. And let me know, if you want to be if you're a huge Joe fan out there and you want to be a guest on my show. I love having Joe fans guest with me. So yeah, Joe Fan 82. It's my pleasure entirely. Thank you for having me on your show. It's completely my pleasure.
Oh, well, thanks for appearing on my show, Joe. It's been my honor having you. I hope everyone tunes into your podcast, and thanks everyone for watching. As always, you can find me on social media at Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yo, Joe.